Hi everyone, welcome back to Undefined Life. It's Tash here. So I wanted to hop on and share something that's been really close to my heart recently, a realization that is emerging for me around walking our life path with vulnerability and rawness and honesty and truth, and the importance of this as we move into the age of Aquarius, as the age of unity begins to blossom, as the old earth, the old ways begin to dissolve, and we move through this process of birthing the new earth. What is going to be required of us as a collective is a more open-hearted way of being. I was tempted to call this video, "How are you really?" Because I feel like that question alone, if you ask that question to the average person, especially here in the UK, you will probably get a very conditioned response of, "I'm okay, I'm good, I'm fine," something along those lines. And for the vast majority of people who answer, it's such bullshit. Most people, if you were to take away their coffee, their wine, their weed, their stimulation, and you sat them in a room, even for an hour in stillness, they'd go mad. Most people are not fine. And most people have been conditioned to move through their lives with guards around their hearts for so long that the idea of being honest with other people is unfathomable because they haven't really been honest with themselves for so long. This subject was actually seeded for me at a very experiential level a couple of weeks ago. I went to visit an old friend and we were talking for a couple of hours, and her mum, who I've known for over 10 years, is a really incredible lady who is also on this awakening path. And she walked into the room and sat down at the table, and she just looked at me and she said, "How are you really, Tash?" And it was like her presence and her willingness to actively listen and hold space for my truth was so profound that I was quite taken aback. And I was talking about a situation that I'm moving through that's quite difficult at the moment. And she was asking me, like, "How are you really? Like, what is real and true and present in your heart right now in relation to this situation? Not how you think that person's handling it or what you think the outcome might be, not any of these projections or, none of this catastrophizing, none of the stories attached to other people, just what is real and true and present for you right now." And that was so beautiful. That experience was so beautiful because it was an invitation to unveil and uncloak myself from the burden of having to be okay or good or fine, and just being emotional, being in grief, being in confusion, being in a space of transition, which is challenging. And what that experience really affirmed for me is that is the way of the new earth. That is embodiment in its purest form. It's showing up moment to moment in our experiences exactly as we are. No facade, no mask, no role, no constructed way of being, no conditioning. Just us, how we are in that moment, presenting as we are without there needing to be any bells or whistles or anything else added to that. And knowing that how we are in that moment is not only okay and valid, it's actually the medicine for the world right now, because we've been living in a world the old way, the old conditioned, fear-based patriarchal matrix has been seeded from a place of dissociation from our emotionality and our vulnerability. We've been living at odds with the highly sentient feminine aspect of our consciousness. So we haven't been encouraged as a global population to be in touch with ourselves. And this awakening and ascension process is calling for us to step into deeper levels of embodiment of our truth. And that means being vulnerable and honest about not only the parts of ourselves or our experience that we feel excited about or aligned with, but also the aspects that we struggle with, either unconscious or shadow aspects that are emerging, or even just uncomfortable emotions that are present for us. It's allowing the totality of what is present for us to be there without resistance. This is the medicine that's going to carry us through as we birth this new earth paradigm, as we allow the old, rigid, guarded ways of being to dissolve. And we cannot show up in our truth. We cannot show up with an open heart and vulnerability in our lives unless we're willing to be honest and vulnerable with ourselves first. And this is going to be a revelation for a lot of people as the constructed way of being falls away. And we are forcefully encouraged by source consciousness to continue to shed any and all obstructions from our hearts. It's going to be hard for people because most people are walking around acting in their lives. Most people are playing a role as they move through their experience. Most people are walking into their family home and they're in parent mode, or most people are walking into work and they're in, colleague mode, or they walk into their communities and they're the joker or the martyr or the victim. These are usually unconscious programs that are playing out for most people. They're not even consciously aware that they are layering on versions of themselves that are not really true to them in that moment. And we cannot get truly close, connected, real, vulnerable, unless we're willing to shed those layers of distortion and conditioning. And this is so essential because this way of being, of guarding ourselves, of playing a role in our experience, of answering the question, how are you? With, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm okay, is what has kept us from being truly in our bodies, in our lives, in flow with universal consciousness for so long. Really what's being asked of humanity as we move forwards is for us to kind of unburden ourselves, is to remove any and all things that keep us encumbered and trapped in ways of being that are untrue to us. And this can lead to some pretty hard truths. When we first show up in vulnerability with ourselves, we're really faced with the task of asking ourselves, how am I really? What's truly going on for me right now? And we might not like the answer to that question. Hi, Boise. Got the puppy giving me some love. Thank you, darling. It takes a lot of courage to show up and say, you know what? I'm not okay. This relationship is not working. This job drains my soul to a degree that I just can't stand anymore. My family piss me off and are so unsupportive and so at odds with the way that I want to live, and I don't know how to bridge that gap. Or I find it incredibly difficult to walk around the world pretending and playing into this pandemic. Whatever it is that we feel is a truth that's emerging that's hard for us to be real about, that's what we first have to get honest with ourselves about. It's like, what is truly going on for us? And then our next task, once we've been honest with ourselves, is to show up in the world like that and to start meeting the people in our lives with that level of vulnerability and open-heartedness. I don't know about you, but I've seen this on Phil Good's channel. His last video touched on this and I really resonated with it. Hi, beautiful. And it was this sense of, I'm exhausted. I am exhausted with the idea that I need to suppress or deny aspects of myself to try and make other people feel comfortable in their experience, or that I have to in some way play a role and pretend to be engaged in the current paradigm, when I just, that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm tired and exhausted of being anything other than who I am and how I am in this moment. And I think that more and more light workers, more and more individuals who are on the awakening path are beginning to feel the heaviness of pretending, feeling the heaviness of being fake. And most people are tired of it. You know, it's like I've got to a point in my life now where I am done with the shallow surface level bullshit. I'm done with, how are you? I'm good. These pointless interactions between people's conditioning. You know, when you ask how I am, are you really asking me how I am? Do you really want to know? Don't ask me that question if you don't want to know. And likewise, when I ask you how you are, and I'm really asking you, I'm not asking for a conditioned response of, I'm good, shrug shoulders, when I know that's not your truth, because we've been speaking, or I can sense your energy. You know, it's like, can we have the courage to start meeting each other heart to heart instead of conditioning to conditioning, and showing up in presence for each other? Because as this awakening and ascension and process intensifies, which it's absolutely going to, we are going to need the support of our fellow brothers and sisters. We're going to need the support of our communities. We're going to need to support each other in a real and honest way. And that means unsheathing ourselves. That means uncloaking ourselves. That means showing up as we are, even if that version of ourselves isn't pretty or together or hasn't got it all figured out. That's okay. This human experience is really fucking messy and difficult, especially during this pivotal evolutionary process that we're in at the moment. It's not simple. It's not slick. It's not smooth and easy. It is nuanced and difficult and exhilarating and blissful and challenging. It is everything. And that's exactly how it's supposed to be. So our real challenge and task as we move through, as the age of Aquarius continues to unfold, as we move into this new age for humanity, as the old ways die, and we're seeing them die around us now, and as the new earth is being birthed through us. You know, the new earth is not something that's going to arrive. It emerges through us as we embody a state of consciousness that is real and true and honest and connected. As this way of being begins to seed in the world of form, the way that we continue to build a more loving and connected world is to show up embodied in that space of love and connection. So perhaps a point of reflection, and I'm going to do this too, would be to notice in your interactions with other people your tendencies in conversation. So say you meet a friend or a colleague, noticing the programmed urge to either fill silence or to say something like, how are you? Or how's it going? Or something that in some way feels constructed. And it's noticing that tendency. And actually in those moments when we're in the conversation and we feel the urge to emerge, to fill the silence, to fill the space, can we connect with our hearts and sink into whatever's real in that moment? And if stillness and silence is real, can we be with that? If we actually have nothing of any meaning or impact to share in that moment, can we just be with that? If we're noticing, sensing that the person in our experience, in our field, is carrying something, can we approach them with vulnerability in our hearts and truly look them in the eyes and ask them, how are you really? Because when we lead with that level of vulnerability, we encourage and invite others to soften into that level of vulnerability too. So as light workers, one of our tasks is to lead the way by being the way. And it's actually in being embodied examples for others. So it usually means that we will have to be the ones that show up in our vulnerability first, so that we can create a container for others to begin to let go, release, and shed themselves of any tension that they were holding so that they can then show up in realness too. And this is a process, I'm sharing this now with this intention in my heart to move through my experience in this way. I still have my conditioning and programming. I'm still human, but this is my intention because I realized not long ago that I'm tired of living in a world that isn't true and real and authentic. And I can't wait for the world to change and hope that it will. If I've made that realization, it means that I'm here to be part of that change. And that means that if I want to see that in my world, I have to start showing up in a more real, true, authentic way. And that might mean being vulnerable in situations where I would otherwise guard myself, and I would keep my walls up and I would contain my emotions. And this awakening process is really about returning to love. It's really about returning to the force of love, which is the only force in the world that can contain everything else we experience in this human experience. Anger, bitterness, resentment, betrayal, rage, grief, sadness, whatever emerges for us and feels deeply uncomfortable for us to be with, the only force that can contain all of that is unconditional love. And that is what is accessible and possible for us via our heart portals. And that is the force of creation. It is love beyond condition. So this awakening process is about moving back into that embodied knowing that that is our truth, that we are expressions of this unconditional love, and that we've simply had experiences, wounding, traumas layered on top of that love that we're moving through in order to return to it. So I'm going to leave that there. I would really love to hear your thoughts and feelings about how you're feeling moving through this 3D experience at the moment, which feels super intense and dense at the moment. So if you're also feeling that, know that you're not alone. This is such a powerful time. It's just unprecedented, this process of awakening. And if you are also feeling exhausted by being fake, being untrue, being dishonest, being, playing a role, acting as though you're something when at some level you feel something completely different, you're not alone in that either. And I invite you to be a way shower, to show up in your truth and vulnerability, and to model to others that it's safe and possible to do that. So thank you so much for joining me today, sending you lots and lots of love from the depths of my heart. And I look forward to connecting with you again really soon.